All right, guys, so we're going to demonstrate some different targeted grazing approaches or different grazing methods. And we're going to use this salmon ranch as our base ranch. And we're going to use this to demonstrate or a few different grazing techniques. And we may be taking out fences to demonstrate a certain technique, or we may be moving cattle around. So just spend some time, get familiar with the salmon ranch. The ranch headquarters is probably the most important part right now. So, because the headquarters and the facilities and stuff are not going to change, and neither will the ranch road. And then there is a hillside pasture down here in the southeast corner, and then the lower pastures as well in the south are what we call they're a different soil type, so they're kind of a loamy, shallow, rocky soil. So this is going to be the basis for the next few slides. All right, so the first grazing technique that we're going to talk about is continuous or season-long grazing, and this is really where a specific pasture is going to be grazed the entire year, and even during the dormant season. So this would be essentially equivalent to removing all the fences on the salmon ranch and just letting animals graze the whole entire ranch for the whole entire year. So I'm going to be showing you a couple of different grazing calendars down here towards the bottom. So continuous grazing is where you have one herd and they're going to be in one pasture and they're going to graze that pasture all year long. Deferred rotation grazing is a program that has two pastures, and one of those pastures is going to be deferred over the years. So deferment is defined as a period of non-grazing until the seed has been able to set in. So in some ecosystems, this may be a full year. In other systems, this may be half a year, or in areas like California, this may be a few months. So deferred grazing again is just where you have two pastures where a deferment from grazing is rotated among pastures over the year. So in year one, which is where the big red arrow is down here, we are going to be grazing in April, May, June, and July, and then we will be rotating in to the west pasture in the middle of July, August, September, and October. So you can see we're actually moving animals back and forth depending on what year we're in. So again, in year one, we are going to be grazing the east pasture in April, May, June, and part of July. And then in year two, that is going to be where we're going to be grazing from July through October, again back around until the next July. So it takes a whole year basically not a whole year, it takes half a year for the seed to set in this area. All right, so and then we're going to flip back and forth as well. So a deferred rotation in a three pasture system looks a little bit different, where we would actually have a north, center, and a south pasture. And we would defer grazing in year one on the south pasture here. So again, here's our calendar for year one, and the south pasture is going to be deferred from April through June. And so during that time, we would actually be grazing in the north pasture through mid-June, and then rotating those cattle in July through August in that center pasture. And then by that time, the seed would have been able to set in, so they can go into that third pasture that was being deferred. In year two, we're going to defer grazing in the north pasture, and then so we'll only be grazing the center pasture from April through the mid-June, and then we'll move cattle at mid-June into that south pasture, and then they will go back to the north pasture the middle of August through October. And then finally in year 3, we will be deferring grazing in the center pasture down here. So we will be starting grazing in the south pasture through mid-June. In mid-June, we'll move to the north pasture, and then finally in towards the end of August, we will actually be able to graze that center pasture that was previously deferred. Another grazing system is rest rotation. In this program, you actually need 3 pastures to make this work, and 1 pasture is going to not be grazed for an entire year. So rest has a very specific definition. Rest is defined as a period of non-grazing for a whole growing season. So again, still dealing with the salmon ranch, we still have 3 pastures, north, center, and a south pasture. And however, we're using a rest rotation practice this time instead of deferred grazing. So in year 1, our cattle are going to start out in that north pasture. They're going to graze through July. Then they're going to move to the center pasture through November. And then in year 2, we can actually dump them into the south pasture because the south pasture would have been rested the entire year 1. And so in year 2, we're going to graze the south pasture through the end of July, and then the north pasture through the end of November. And finally, in the 3rd year, we are going to rest the north pasture. So we'll be grazing the center pasture through July, and then from August through November, we will be grazing the south pasture. So this is a rest rotation grazing, where rest is defined as resting a pasture for the length of 1 year. An intense rotation grazing pattern is, you also may hear called high intensity short duration grazing. So this is really equivalent to the Allen Savory program. And this program is where the pasture is going to be grazed for a short time and at least twice a year. So on the salmon ranch, we would actually have to put in another set of fences and to create a total of 6 pastures. And our calendar looks a little bit different too. So keep in mind this is just 1 year. So we've got these are the pastures. So pasture A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then our calendar is along the top. April, May, June, July, August, September, and October. Okay, so pasture A is going to be grazed the last part of April. And then the first part of May, we're going to move to pasture B. The second part of May, we're going to move to pasture C. The first part of June, we're going to move to pasture D. The last part of June, we're in E. And the first part of July, we are in pasture F. And then we start over again. So the last part of July, we're going to be in pasture A again. So, and then you just go through your moving pastures about every 15 days in this scenario, so it's a little more intensive. So by the end of that first year, by the end of October, you will have ended in pasture F. So each pasture is grazed twice during the grazing year. All right, so that is the 4 major types of grazing programs that you will see. So try to fit in one of these that will work in your grazing management plans, but also be cognizant of costs and labor. So a lot of these things really have to do with the labor to go out and move cattle around. Just keep in mind that they're pretty big, extensive ranches at this point. So just be aware of that as well.